Hello friends, welcome back to Cloud Pedagogy. In this lab, we are going to set up a few more environmental settings for our student directory application in AWS. This will allow you to follow along with the walkthroughs throughout the CI/CD process. But if you are totally new to my course, you can use any number of different servers. Now, to work with the developer tools, we can use a number of different servers like Linux, Amazon Linux 2 or Ubuntu or any number of different servers. We can also use Windows servers, but to cut down on complication, we are going to focus on the same student directory application server, which is Amazon Linux 2023 server. So if you are ready, let's jump into our task. In task 1, we are going to connect to student directory application EC2 instance. In task 2, we are going to install Git. In task 3, we are going to configure the IAM. In task 4, we are going to configure credential helper HTTP. Finally, in task 5, we are going to configure SSH for student directory application team. So let's start with the task 1. Connect to our student directory application EC2 instance. In this task, I would expect you to finish the Lab 1 student directory application complete deploy with AWS services in this course. In the EC2 console page, just note that the region that you are in. So this server should be in the region where your repository is going to be. Let's just keep everything in the same region, which is North Virginia region. When our instance is ready, we'll go ahead and SSH into that. Just verify that everything is okay. So our server is ready. Let's click on that. And let's click connect. I'm just going to copy this SSH connection string and I'm going to switch the screen. Alright, so I brought up a terminal window. Let's go into downloads. Let's just bounce back over to the management console. Here is our command. We do the ch mode on our key pair, then we just SSH in. Alright, we are in. Good job. So we have successfully configured our administrative server. In task 2, we are going to install the Git repository. Now other things we need to do, we are going to have to do a Git installation. CodeCommit is compatible with Git. So we will be issuing Git commands on our CodeCommit repository. We are going to install Git on our Amazon Linux 2023 server because as we progress through the course, we will add users from our student directory application development team. And each of those users will be using Git. Of course, we have used an Amazon Linux 2023 AMI, but you can use other AMIs for installation like Linux, Mac OS, Windows. I'm not going to actually do the installation on each of these, but it's pretty straightforward and this will give you a head start if you want to try that. So with Linux, let's talk about some of the different distributions like Fedora, Debian or Ubuntu, Amazon Linux, which of course we are going to use. And just to remember that each of these distributions has their own package management tool. For Fedora, it is DNF. For Debian and Ubuntu, it is APT. And then for Linux, it is yum. We can now install Git. Sudo yum install Git. I'll click yes for the size prompt. And there we go. We have installed Git. I'll clear my screen again. Now let's check our version. Just say Git version. There we go. It's really simple to install Git and we will be using Git throughout the course. Remember, CodeCommit will be our main repository and it interacts perfectly with Git. So that's it with the task 2. We have successfully finished installing our Git repository. In task 3, we are going to configure our IAM configurations. As we have learned, we have made the decision that we are going to use the Linux route. We are going to create an IAM user for CodeCommit. Now let's go to users. Let's go ahead and add few users. Basically our student directory development team. So I'm going to add Resh, Kin and Rohi. Let's go with Resh. Nice thing we can do is we can create these all at once. You can add all users at one stretch or just add one user at your choice. And notice when we click that, we can auto generate a password or we can create a custom password. Let's just do a custom. Name it what we want to. Just remember to note it down. But let's go with the permissions. Since I have created user Resh, let me create other dev users Skins and Rohi. But remember, so far I did not add any permissions to these users. We will do that when we create a group for this development team. Now one of the things we can do is create a group for these users. Let's just go ahead and do that. But the advantage of is, in this way we can attach one policy to our group. Then all users in our group will have this policy. The additional advantage is that as users are added to the group, they will have these permissions. If they leave the group, then of course they will lose these permissions. So click on user groups here. Let's just go ahead and do that. Click add group. Enter a name for the group. Next, select the users list here. I am selecting my 3 users under this development group. Let's go ahead and attach a policy. Typing in CodeCommit, there is a CodeCommit read-only, CodeCommit power user. And maybe we will use that momentarily here, but for our development team, let's just go full access. And that is going to allow them to interact with CodeCommit. And they are going to have full permissions on CodeCommit. Good job, we have created our IAM user. We actually created all of our users and additionally placed those users in a group. And that's pretty handy just to manage those users as a group. So in the task 4, I'm going to configure credential helper HTTP. In this task, we are going to set up the credential helper for HTTP and HTTPS. Specifically, we are going to edit the .git config file on our Linux machine to recognize the credentials for our IAM user. In our case, users that we gave CodeCommit permissions. Since we have created 3 new users and assigned that full CodeCommit policy to those users, so they're all good as well. They are configured properly. And then the other prerequisites are simply install Git, which we have done already, and install AWS CLI, which is pre-packed in Amazon Linux 2023 AMI. So we have covered our prerequisites to configure next step. So now we are set up already, but just for the demonstration purpose, I am doing AWS help and it's going to verify that our CLI is configured properly. So I'll just quit out of that, and what we need to do is run the command git config global credential helper. So let me explain what this command is doing. We are calling on Git and we are saying we want to configure the credential helper. Now we have -- global here. This could be either be global or local. If it is global, it means we are assigning this profile to all of the CodeCommit repositories in our account. So if we did local, we could have different repositories with different profiles, but with global, we are just applying this profile to any of our repositories. Now the string inside of the single quotes is a string that we are putting the .git config file, and that is going to point Git to our AWS credentials. Now we need to run the command git config global credential use HTTP true or git config global credential use HTTP. If you just think that through, so this is telling Git that we are going to use HTTP as our protocol as opposed to SSH. So let's run that, and finally let's run git config global edit. We are just going to view this .git config file. So that command actually opens up the Vim editor, and note our file name as expected. So it has a section for credential, and very simply it has 2 lines that we wanted to add. So that's good. Now we can exit. Good job. Our credentials are set up and we are now ready to connect to our AWS CodeCommit repositories. In the final task, we are going to configure SSH for our student directory team members. We can configure our student directory development team users like Resh, Kins, Rohi in the EC2 instance and set them up so that they can SSH in our student directory server. I'm going to SSH into our EC2 instance, but before that we want to grab the public key of our key pair. Now we could set up a key pair for our each individual user, or we could use this key pair for all of our users. Either way is valid. So we'll just keep it simple and use the key pair that we have already. Now what I want to do is to get the public key. I'll just enter the command ssh keygen with the PEM file. This is the key pair that we created when we created our EC2 instance. So whatever you named your key pair, that's what would be here. So let's go ahead and run that, and there it is. So we want to copy this and maybe save it to a Word document, and just make sure that you get all of it. Again, save that off to a Word document. We will need that later. Next, we just SSH into our general EC2 user. So let's copy that and paste it in our terminal. Alright, first thing we want to do is add our user, and I'll just point out that creating users in the management console is perfectly fine. But if you want those users to be able to SSH into your EC2 instance, you have to go through this process. So we add a user and then we are going to switch our context to that user. So I'm going to create a user, sudo add user, a username, in this case Resh. And then I'm switching to that user, sudo su resh. Just note the spaces and watch our context over here and notice that we changed over to resh. Now we want to make an SSH directory. So let's do that. We'll change the permissions. After giving our user read, write, execute permissions to this directory, now let's cd into that directory. Now what we want to do is create an authorized key file. So I'm creating them. Now we want to change the permissions on this file. What I'm going to do here is I'm giving permissions to user Resh to have read and write permissions along. Next, we are going to vim into our authorized keys file. And you probably can guess what's coming here. We need to paste in our public key, which we retrieved from our keygen command. And then we can escape, say :wq not to exit. And that's it. We have set up a new user Resh on our EC2 instance, and this user will be able to SSH into the instance. So let's cross verify that. Now I'm going to exit this. Notice the first exit, just exit out of Resh. We need to exit out again, completely out of our EC2 instance. Exit again. Alright, so we are back to our own local machine. Open the terminal again, go to the downloads directory so I can SSH in as Resh. There is my key pair in the double quotes. Here is my DNS for that instance, and I just need to change the username and just make sure that you get all of it. So now we can SSH in as Resh. So in our student directory application, we will be using 2 more development team users. So if you want to follow along, just make sure that you have added 2 more users to the instance who are Kins and Rohi, just the way we did for Resh. Good job. We are SSH'd into our EC2 instance as Resh, so that is the short process for adding users to your EC2 instance. But be careful, just make sure you get all of these commands in order, otherwise most likely you will get a permission denied. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you again in my next session. Until then, keep learning with fun.